In most industries, when a company fails, it happens slowly. Sales drop, layoffs begin, locations close, and over time the company fades away. But every once in a while, a company fails so fast that it barely exists at all. In 2007, a new airline launched in the United States with a bold idea. The company promised extremely cheap flights, sometimes unbelievably low fares, and a completely new way of running an airline. Investors were excited, passengers were curious, and the company believed it had found the future of air travel. Less than a year later, the airline was bankrupt, flights were cancelled with almost no warning, and passengers across the country were stranded. The airline was called Skybus. To understand why Skybus failed so quickly, you first have to understand the airline industry. Airlines are one of the most difficult businesses in the world to run. The costs are enormous and constant. Planes, pilots, maintenance, insurance, airport fees, and especially fuel. Most of these costs do not change whether the plane is full or empty. If a plane takes off with 20 passengers or 150 passengers, the fuel cost is almost the same. That means airlines live and die by one thing: filling seats. Over time, airlines started experimenting with low-cost business models. Instead of luxury and large airports, they used smaller airports, faster turnaround times, and charged extra for optional services. And this model worked. Airlines like Southwest and Ryanair proved that low-cost flying could be profitable. But Skybus wanted to go even further. Their idea was to become an ultra-low-cost airline. Tickets would be extremely cheap, sometimes advertised at incredibly low prices. The company planned to make money not from the ticket itself, but from everything else. Fees for bags, fees for seat selection, fees for food, fees for boarding early, and advertising everywhere. Inside the plane, on tray tables, on overhead bins, and even partnerships with companies that would pay to advertise to passengers. They also decided not to fly into major airports. Instead, Skybus would use smaller regional airports where fees were cheaper. The planes would land, unload, reload, and take off again quickly, allowing each plane to fly more routes per day. More flights per plane meant more opportunities to make money. On paper, the business model looked brilliant. Lower costs, faster flights, more fees, more advertising, and very cheap tickets that would attract lots of passengers. But there were problems almost immediately. The biggest problem was fuel. In 2007 and 2008, fuel prices started rising quickly. And fuel is one of the biggest costs for any airline. When your entire business model is built around extremely cheap tickets, rising fuel prices can destroy your margins almost instantly. The second problem was that smaller airports meant fewer passengers. It was harder to consistently fill flights, and empty seats are one of the fastest ways for an airline to lose money. The third problem was cash. Airlines require huge amounts of cash to operate. Planes have to be paid for, staff have to be paid, fuel has to be paid for immediately, and maintenance is constant. Even if the airline is growing and selling tickets, if it runs out of cash, the company shuts down. And that is exactly what happened. In April 2008, Skybus suddenly announced it was shutting down operations. Flights were cancelled almost immediately. Passengers who had already booked flights were stranded. Some passengers had flown to a destination on Skybus but could not fly home because the airline had already shut down. Employees were laid off, investors lost millions of dollars, and the airline ceased operations almost overnight. Skybus had launched with a bold idea and a lot of attention, but it didn't have enough cash to survive rising costs and early problems. The business model itself wasn't completely wrong. In fact, the ultra-low-cost airline model exists today and is used by airlines like Spirit and Frontier. Cheap base ticket, charge for everything else, and make money on add-ons. But Skybus didn't have enough time, enough money, or enough margin for error to survive long enough to make the model work. This story is a perfect example of how many companies actually fail. Most companies do not fail because the idea is terrible. They fail because of timing, rising costs, running out of cash, or trying to grow too quickly. In expensive industries like airlines, there is almost no room for error. If something goes wrong and you don't have enough money to survive the problem, the company can collapse almost immediately. Sometimes the most interesting companies are not the ones that succeed, but the ones that fail quickly and publicly, because they reveal how difficult an industry really is. And sometimes, those failures become lessons that the next company uses to succeed. Skybus failed almost overnight, but the idea behind it didn't disappear. It just needed more time, more money, and better timing. And in business, sometimes timing is everything.